Welcome to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today we have a really interesting guest with Andrea Kayal. Now, Andrea, part of what makes you very interesting is you've taken a career path, all B2B, right? All B2B tech. You've had a lot of marketing experience. You've been a 3-time CMO, but you've made the move now and you're the CRO of Help Scout, your organization. And you're not only a CRO that oversees sales, but you oversee marketing, sales, and basically customer success, the whole go-to-market strategy. So I would love to know a little bit more about that and how you coordinate independently across these teams, because internal alignment is a very, very large issue. But I just learned something really interesting. You worked with and were the assistant to Pele, one of the greatest of all time football or soccer, depending on where you are in the world, players. I think that's just fascinating. But if you wouldn't mind, if you could start on what I said there or expand on your background a little bit, and then we'll dig in.
Sure. Yep. You mentioned it, but most of my career has been chief marketing officer. I find that role to be particularly complex and interesting, challenging role. There's over 12 disciplines to marketing, maybe even more the larger the company you support. But most of what I've been doing in my career as a marketer, though, is figuring out how we go to market. How do we acquire more customers? How do we acquire the right types of customers? How do we think about their buying behavior? How do we do that as cost effective as possible? What kinds of strategies do we deploy to do that? But one benefit I found in moving from CMO to CRO is actually the leverage it gives the CEO. There's with one sort of like basically person to deliberate with related to the go-to-market strategy versus many like chief sales, chief marketing, chief customer, chief product. I find that those conversations for the CEO just end up being a little bit smoother, decision-making moves a little bit faster. Also to the point you're making related to internal alignment. And with me as the accountable to all of the outcomes related to go-to-market, each of the people who report into me are responsible for particular inputs to that. And with like centralized aligned outcomes, I find actually that there's very little friction across teams because they know what they're responsible for and the handoff to the next team. And I don't know, I don't find this to be a particularly difficult or problem that I've had to solve for in my career. Maybe I've been lucky in that regard. I know you said, I think 70% of the people you have on the show cite this as one of those, but I think with really tightly aligned outcomes, I find that just doesn't become a problem too often.
Yeah, it's the number one challenge. And I found that in over 100 interviews here. I've talked to a number of different partners in go-to-market consulting companies, and they talk about how they come into a new client relationship and there's all kinds of problems that are surfaced. There's never a problem finding problems. But what they do is they start out most often with an alignment survey just to see where everybody is. And this was also studied, I think it was by McKinsey. It was a survey that said well-aligned organizations have over 2 times the revenue of
I
non-aligned
believe that.
organizations.
Yeah. And just to be clear, Steve, it's not that I don't have problems inside of these organizations. That's actually the job is like solving problems. I find that alignment hasn't been my top problem in organizations, despite the fact that's an ever evolving like conversation and work that needs to be done. There's always going to be a certain set of problems related to it. I just find that it doesn't end up being my number one.
I think that's probably a lot because you're doing some of the right things. And I'd love to, you touched on it briefly there, but I'd love to hear more about how do you ensure alignment between the teams? Because that doesn't just naturally happen.
Now, well, I find that very clear SLAs, for lack of a better terms, like service level agreements between each team, like a very formal documentation process is required. And I'll give you a very specific example. At Electric, we had a service level agreement that the chief sales officer and I worked on. I was chief marketing officer at the time, that basically said, which 5 things does this meeting need to meet in order for your sales team to agree that it is an opportunity worth working? And we workshopped that for 2 weeks straight with sales teams, with marketing teams, and we really like lasered in on who that ideal customer is. And it needed to meet those 5 requirements. But when it met those 5 requirements, that got accepted into pipeline, and win rate was now on the chief sales officer. So we just were very clear about the requirement for marketing. And if it met that, and also we would go chat, we would listen to calls, we would make sure that it wasn't the sales rep that missed something or didn't ask a question. We really had a very tight process for confirming where the handoff was, so that I could say marketing delivered X amount of great pipeline to you. Now it's on you guys to win that at 30%. We're going to call it a day. And then we just stopped all conversation around it and moved on to the next alignment thing. But we were very tightly aligned about what success meant in either organization. And then a lot of noise went away from both teams.
What I love about that is you've gone even deeper than ICP as a definition, because there's a lot of teams that have very ill-defined ICPs, right?
You're right. Yeah, it's not just is it in this industry and it did it? We had very specific requirements for what met that criteria. And I'll give you an example. We needed to make sure that company used Microsoft Teams or Slack, because we would be a terrible fit for any company who didn't use those 2 things. So it's not only was this ideal by the psychographic and firmographic information? It was is it ideal because of how they operate their business? And if they did, it got accepted into pipeline. And now it's on you, Mr. Sales Rep or Mrs. Sales Rep, to go close.
So now that you're overseeing marketing and sales, and I'm sure you've got SLAs between the different departments here as well, there's an area that is, you can call it a gap in most B2B companies, where lots of times the deals that marketing brings forward, the leads that we bring forward, are earlier stage. They're not always BANT qualified, right? And, but most often sales organizations are built around compensation packages that benefit short-term attainment, right? Close deals this quarter, this month. So how do you design for the middle? How do you design when this is somebody that is in our list? We all have lists. These are the companies we want to do business with, right? And in this day and age, we know we have to build relationships. You can't just decide, because you're seeing a lot of intent signals, all of a sudden, now is when we build trust. Now is when we build relationships, right? This is a longer process. So that's typically a marketing and sales function that has that gap in the middle. And I'm just wondering how you think about that gap, and maybe marketing nurturing longer, sales picking up earlier, changing compensation structures. I mean, I've heard a ton, but I would love to hear your point of view on what you do with that gap.
As you were talking, I was thinking about our current SLA, about where I think that gap might be. Maybe one way I was thinking about that, Steve, is that actually I don't think it's a gap in the middle. I think that's still a marketing gap to solve for, which is still on the marketing teams to make sure that by the time we get it over to sales, it means they actually had intent to see the product and want to talk to a sales rep, because that journey, the nurturing journey, the intent journey, the trust building journey is a marketing job. This is why I think, again, no shade to my sales counterparts, but the marketing function, the CMO function, which is these 12 disciplines I mentioned at the front, all of those disciplines support all of that journey we just mentioned, which is why I'm I don't know that it's a gap between teams. It's a problem for marketing to solve for completely before they toss it over the wall to sales, which is this person has now said, I want to speak to sales rep. So again, we don't help scout, and even at Electric, we didn't really do a ton of outbounding from the sales reps to prospects, because that just meant that there would be so much later in the stage. And actually marketing is a better touch point for them until that point at which they're ready to really engage. And then we send them over to sales, because that's where I think the unique value prop is for a sales organization. It's marketing built the trust. Sales need to now really convince them, why us? And that's where we have each team focused, versus maybe this in the middle piece that you were talking about. It's really just all on marketing.
So what's interesting is there's been a couple of things that marketing has had to evolve past. You talked about it. Marketing is no longer an MQL, throw it over the wall to sales, right? We've got to stay involved much longer. And in fact, I talk to CMOs all the time that are we're involved all the way through past close deal retention, but that hasn't always been the mindset. And the mindset had been for a long time is how can we automate absolutely everything, which to a certain degree kind of flies in the face of it's all about relationships. It's all about building trust, right? So how do you stay involved? And if you're saying that's not really a gap, it's just more the responsibility of marketing, right? You could call it that then there's like almost a CRM that marketing needs to have, right? There's nurture, there's relationships that need to be built, sequences that are designed, all kinds of things that need to happen there. How do you see that happening and not just running automations?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly have plenty of automation, and AI is obviously making this way easier. But no matter the tool or the type of communication you have going out, the trust building, like the job to be done for marketing is to create enough trust and endearment to the brand that by the time they are ready to want to engage with the sales rep, that is also another fundamentally like different view of marketing now, which is like people are going to ask the LLM, for example, what the best company is, and they're going to trust that with their whole heart, whether they use an LLM or not. Trust is the thing that marketing has always tried to build, whether you did that through a bunch of automation or whatever else. But trust and endearment to the brand is still the job. I still think that the job of the sales rep is to be like, great, you believe that we are a potential solution for you. Let me show you exactly why. Here are all of our capabilities, like more of the down funnel thing. But if marketing didn't believe that like building trust end to end was the job, like then maybe that's fundamentally like where that person would need to like shift the mindset. But it's still all how do we make sure that we can connect with this person on what feels like a B2C level so that they're ready to buy this like B2B technology.
I love your phrasing of that marketing's job is building trust end to end, right? And I think it was right before the beginning of the year, Forrester came out and they said 2026 prediction, it's all about trust. Like trust is the currency, right?
And by the way, this is why SEO started to do this and LLM started to do this. And again, whether we can debate all day how much to trust the LLM, that LLM is still being fed information from the internet, like sources that have all been written to suggest a particular tool in the first place. It's an aggregation of all the sources. So you really should use some level of like your own filter when just getting a piece of information from Claude or OpenAI or Gemini or whatever. But instead, and why the LLMs? Because they'd rather use the aggregate of what's happening on the internet, and the LLMs do prioritize sentiment. So how is the brand showing up like on trust review sites or whatever? Like they do use it directionally, but it's why you'd go to an LLM versus the first link you saw, because there's been a team of people trying to make sure that link showed up as the first. It's very self-serving. So anyway, it's showing up everywhere in every like data point. This continues to evaluate that like when someone trusts the source or the information and the brand, obviously they're more likely to request information or show intent for that brand.
So I'd love to ask a little bit more about competitive pressures that are happening in the marketplace these days. You talked about rising competition and how it's easier for new market entrants to come in, especially as any kind of like SaaS product. We're all like really looking behind ourselves these days, thinking, oh my gosh, everybody's writing code at lightning speed now, right? How much is Claude going to do that we're already doing? And so, how does competition impact today's environment? Building that trust, building those relationships, and closing those deals.
I think that, yeah, the barrier to entry for like a market entrant to create and develop technology is pretty low. That's what it democratized. To recreate all the trust a 14-year-old SaaS business like ourselves has created in the market, hard. That's where the barrier to entry has somewhat of a wall. You need to like climb over, and it's not impossible, but there's 14 years, and I'll just speak to Help Scout specifically, but there's 14 years of like really well done thought leadership that Help Scout has put out in the world, helping customer support leaders do their jobs better, get tips, tricks, like how to handle hard conversations, whatever. And the actual Help Scout product is really well done and people love it. And it's like well priced and it does what it needs to get done. So the sentiment about it is really high. So those two things together, when somebody's then asking an LLM who they should use, because this is the new search way people are finding products, we end up showing up very high. And so we will continue to prioritize human developed thought leadership and content, and just like a human focus on our brand, because I do think people can recognize a difference today and they value that. I do think that's where the trust is happening. I don't know yet what's happening with the AI native companies related to how they're acquiring new customers in this new market. Certainly companies like Sierra and Decagon are clearly not having challenges doing that. They're way up market from us, but they're AI native and they're growing like a weed. So they've also have some secret sauce too, to how they're thinking about the growth of their company. It's just different than how we are.
It's interesting. There's a whiplash, if you want to call it, happening. I talk to a lot of CROs that are saying to me these days, Steve, I'm buying plane tickets again. I'm getting out and I'm seeing customers and I'm meeting new business prospects. And I wasn't doing that before, but call it because of AI, call it whatever. But this focus on trust building, relationship building, we've heard those things forever, right? So it's very easy to say, yeah, yeah, yeah. And just like the word value, of course, we have to provide value. And that these are so basic and they've been here since the dawn of time, but there is a reemergence and there is a direct correlation in trust decline. If you go to the Edelman Trust Barometer, 32,000 worldwide respondents, 68% think that business leaders like you and I are being misleading intentionally. It's 68%. You wonder why they're waiting longer and longer to want to talk to us and going to the LLMs or their peers, or right. It's not something that's just AI. It's a geopolitical thing too, right? It's just trust overall. We're less trusting than we were a year ago, 2 years ago, 10 years ago. It talks about going back to the fundamentals. The other thing that's happening there too is that buyers are waiting longer and longer to want to talk to the sales organization. All of a sudden, like within your go-to-market, are you surfacing others inside of the organization to buyers as people that they can talk with, that they can learn from, they can engage with, that are outside of a sales organization? Is that something that is rising in importance, right? That we all need to be customer facing?
No, I would think maybe this is more along the track we were talking about earlier related to our thought leadership. We have a podcast and a newsletter called The Supportive. Obviously, it's something we invest in, but you wouldn't necessarily know that. Help Scout isn't plastered all over the place, but we do have one of our employees who's like really steeped in customer support, just interviewing other customer support leaders about what's working for them and what's not working for them. So again, like when you think about building trust, we have no incentive other than to help people learn more about or like trends or whatever in the customer support industry. We obviously have incentive to create the thought leadership, but you wouldn't necessarily know that this is a Help Scout product, but it's ours. It's called The Supportive. We do invest in people educating, I think, the market on how to be your best customer support self or whatever that are not sales. And by the way, this person is under the marketing team. We do invest marketing dollars at that. But as far as content and thought leadership, it's all done by non-sales oriented individuals.
And you had said in our last conversation that you thought that B2B feels increasingly more personal.
Yeah. Well, I think I don't know if it is feeling, Steve, or I think it needs to feel increasingly more B2C, because maybe if it's even the stat that I was feeling related to the 68% of respondents feel that business leaders are being intentionally untoward or whatever, like not telling the truth or however you phrase that.
Intentionally misleading.
Yes. As sad as that statistic is, I think this is why maybe more companies need to start positioning the brand to feel more human and helpful than there's an ask at the end of every interaction, where just provide information that's useful. And then hopefully they understand or can navigate to ultimately the outcome we're looking for, which is that they do agree we're helpful and that they purchase the platform. But the way at that is to have this human consumer feel than it is like we're a big company and we're not here to help you. That's not the case at all.
The term hyper personalization has been thrown around for a long time now. You talked about being customer centric and turning insights that we learn from our customers into action. The more that we know, the more that we can build that personal relationship that you're talking about, where they really see that, oh, you walk a mile in my shoes, you understand, you get it. That's what they want to know. They want to know that we're not vendors selling, like you're saying, but we're actually, if we could move from vendors to peers, that's the goal. And so, how do you think about customer centric alignment and then turning that into a go to market action?
I'll give you the abridged version, mostly because it's in like everything we do from top to bottom is to think about how, this brand feels more human. We had a big town hall today, and like the part of our positioning that is still like very core and fundamental to Help Scout is this human centric brand. We hopefully don't feel like we're selling, we're educating the market on customer support. Like I said, hopefully that turns into somebody who agrees and wants to take a demo or whatever. But like, if not, no problem. Also, we want to be seen as the company that's the leading provider of like great education for customer support. This shows up everywhere though. All the ads we do, most are about how we've helped a customer do X, customer stories. A big page we just launched on our website was all about like how this is impacting current customers. So that's the walk a mile in our shoes approach. We also did a bunch of events last year where instead of just take a demo, get a whatever, it was just like join us for dinner. The overarching point is that, we want to be like helpful and useful and give versus take. By the way, this is what personal relationships are. My wife and I talk about this frequently when we think about our own friendships. It's like the best friendships are where like the debits and credits are zero, where you just feel like it's just mutually beneficial, that a bank account that the friend has not like taken more than they've been given, and you go back and forth. And that should be how a vendor operates. How much have we given back to this prospect before we're asking for their business? That's the relationship front. And that's strategic point that we talk about at the highest level.
So tell me your thoughts on this. When I asked that question of all the C-suite executives, what are your two greatest challenges to creating long-term sustainable growth? I have never, ever had one C-suite executive say that anything about product was their challenge. Never. And so we know the product is important. Nobody's saying the product isn't important. I'm a 2-time SaaS founder. Believe me, I get it. But it's interesting because 100% of the time, it has never come up in terms of a go-to-market challenge. I'm just wondering about your perspective on communications, a marketing, a trust building strategy. How does, of the go-to-market motion, and where does product play into that?
Interestingly enough, for this role, I have a product leader who could not be more of a aligned partner in the go-to-market journey. Really understands like the revenue challenges, both on the acquisition side and the retention side, and could not be more dialed in. That is unusual for a product leader, not because they don't understand revenue is like the ultimate goal, but that product is this like winding journey for like what to build and what to prioritize. When I think about how product fits into our go-to-market strategy, we meet monthly. We go over all the commercial asks. What are we hearing in deals? We have lots of tools now that aggregate all this. So those meetings are very easy because it's all data driven. We're prioritizing those obviously like on big customer asks and whether or not it fits into our current product strategy. What is it going to take to win some deals on like the new acquisition side? Then now, most recently, since product and engineering are learning how to build and ship faster, we're really starting to think about product monetization. What are the basket of goods we can sell to our customers? That is a very exciting like evolution of how product is supporting marketing, because now I can just say, hey, I think these 3 things are going to increase our average contract value if we sell them separately. And I'm not having to wait like 3-4 years for that strategy to manifest. The conversations are evolving faster in terms of what's possible because it's been made faster by AI. So product is now very much a lever that I have as I'm thinking about our overall revenue strategy. And that's been very exciting.
It's interesting. AI has come up a number of times in this conversation. It does in every business conversation now. I remember talking to a VP at Google, and he said, there's never a meeting we have where AI is not a part of it, right? But there's also an expectation with AI. You talked about instead of waiting 3 years, how about 3 months? Well, that whole set of expectations is built upon that AI can help us do it much more efficiently, much more high quality, and much faster. That is an expectation that all of our clients also have, that the value that we deliver to them is faster, higher quality. There's an expectation that there's greater value in shorter time, right? How have you felt that impacting the go-to-market, that level of expectation?
We haven't felt the pressure yet. We have customer asks all the time. We haven't felt like it's derailed us, at least, where we're like, okay, we thought we were building one thing and it's completely borked our vision. I think we have a great product vision and a great set of products and features on our roadmap that if we need to prioritize faster, like we could now. It's more just like a prioritization question. It just doesn't feel like a limitation anymore. It's like, oh, okay, well, instead of like doing these 4 things for customers today, we just do 6. We don't have pressure from customers yet being like, oh, we're going to quit or cancel or churn if you don't build this tomorrow because we know you can. But I do think that the expectations of our future development are just going to be growing. And if we do get a customer, a large one who says, hey, we need this, we're going to probably figure out how to get that done for them.
Definitely. We've talked about so much here. I just wanted to give you an opportunity. Our poor human brains can only remember about 2 or 3 things at a time. But if there was one takeaway that you wanted the other C-suite executives, your peers that are going to be consuming this podcast, that you wanted them to take away from our entire conversation, what's the most important thing you'd want them to remember?
Perhaps like one of the first things we were talking about, which is setting the rules of engagement around teams. It's just totally fair to draw those lines and create more formality between teams. It's viewed maybe as a process problem, or maybe we're adding too much process. By simply just creating those guardrails, you free up so much internal discussion and question marks and back and forth that need to happen like between the teams below you. I would just like highly encourage like a very formal service level agreement between organizations. So people are just very clear on what the expectations are. I think it frees up a lot of time following that. The things that we haven't talked about, if I were to say as CRO, one of the most important things that I think I've learned to develop over the course of my journey in this role, started probably as a CMO and then into CRO, is that your job is really equity improvement. It really is about the value, that enterprise value that you're creating for the business. Not to think of it so acutely as like, we're trying to make the business more money. It's like really like this is the CRO's job, is to figure out how we acquire more customers and keep them in a better, healthier like version of the business. And the quicker you can find a framework, I like the Enterprise 5 framework, which is like what framework for your company means you've created enterprise value. I think that far too often CROs really just view the role very acutely like, oh, new ARR or NDR or some of the like inputs. But I think there's some like larger like thematic things that a CRO really needs to think about collectively. I think these 5 things, I use the iconic Enterprise 5. Happy to share that link after, Steve, and any of the materials that go out. But basically, those are 5 metrics that they have said are the 5 most important metrics for what has been representative of the value of the highest valuations of their most valuable portfolio companies. Year over year growth is one of them, obviously, like net dollar retention is one of them, but rule of 40, ARR per FTE, magic number. There's these 5 metrics that collectively say, like, you've made it. We didn't talk about that specifically, but if I were a CRO, and again, I'm an older CRO now, but If I was earlier on in my career, I think one of the first alignment exercises I would have as a CRO is to make sure you're very clear on like which 5 metrics matter most to the board and the business to say, this is what great enterprise value would look like for this company.
I feel like we need another one or two podcasts. That's a whole area right there.
Yeah.
But I love your perspective, your background, your experience. The whole mission of this podcast is to bring different C-suite executives from all over the world together, share our stories, share our unique experiences, what's worked and what hasn't. And the goal is that we all learn from each other. And if we can do that, then that's like the rising tide that lifts all boats. And you were an amazing part of that rising tide today. So
I'm happy to share give back because I listen to podcasts like this one. I do try to consume and stay curious and learn from others. I just try to find who's doing it the best in the moment and learn and grow in that way. So thank you for having me. And hopefully, this was helpful.